back to JG3 Reviews. My name is James, and here I like to explore the world of fountain pens, ink, and paper, and all of that good stuff. And I like to share with you what I find along the way. Today, I want to do this a little bit differently because the pen that I want to share with you is one that I've had for 5 years. This is a real long-term review, and it's a pen that can be a little bit controversial in the sense that people seem to either really like it or maybe really don't. Some people just seem downright irritated by certain features of the pen, and we'll look at all of those things as we go along this review. But first, just in case you had your eyes closed when you clicked on that thumbnail, I need to tell you what this pen is. It is the Lamy 2000. Of course, I guess this is just a box of a Lamy 2000. So let's open up that box. And if you're not familiar, most of you probably are, the Lamy 2000, let's drop it on the table almost while we're digging it out there, is a German pen, a design that's been around since 1966 and largely has remained unchanged. There have been refinements and some things like that, and some special editions, even one offered in wood back in, I think it was the late 90s. Really a pretty cool pen, and each of those special editions have brought something significant to the table. For example, one edition of this pen is a version in all stainless steel, which I think would be quite cool, and I would think for some people it's probably a bit of a grail pen. But the standard edition is this black Macrolon pen. And I know I said a long time ago in a video about another Lamy that by that time had won me over that I'm not a huge fan of pens that are both plastic and expensive. But I do have exceptions. In fact, I don't know. Maybe at this point I have more exceptions than I do rule keeping on that one. I don't know. But some pens do manage to win me over on that. Obviously, I really like pens that are made out of beautiful resins. This is not a beautiful resin. There are pens that I like because they have incredible durability, like the Gravitas polycarbonate or the Eureka Symmetry, or also another Eureka in Ultim. All of those pens won me over because they are very well designed, very well made, and at least the way I use pens, pretty much indestructible. Now this pen might not be as strong as a couple of those, but Macrolon is the stuff of heavy-duty suitcases for frequent flyers, so it is a tough material. It's a reinforced polycarbonate. It's very well made. The quality of how this pen is made is one reason it has so many followers, and it has, to me anyway, an interesting design. And this is one of the areas where things get a little bit polarizing, and I'll talk about that when we get to the zoomed in portion of our overview of the pen. But it's a design that I think is quite sleek. It's Bauhaus design, which means its form follows function. Pare it down to just those things that make it function well and nothing extraneous. And I kind of think that way anyway. Form following function, I think, is the way more things ought to be done. Just kind of makes sense to my brain. And so this pen does, it pushes some buttons there for me. And I will say here at the outset that, a pen that has enjoyed the success this has for closing in on 6 decades, clearly they got some things right, both in the form and the function. So I do appreciate the design and the way this pen writes. So we'll look at that stuff a bit closer. But there are also some things that I will share with you along the way that I think actually make this a much more approachable pen than you might think it is. Some people use this pen as a bit of a fountain pen gatekeeper pen. If you don't have one of these, are you really a pen person? If you don't have one of these, do you really know what you're talking about? If you haven't reviewed it on your channel, is it really even worth watching? There's a little bit of that goes on. But don't let that turn you off for the pen, because that's not a pen problem, that's a people problem, right? In truth, this shouldn't be a gatekeeper. It ought to be a bit of a gateway pen, because this one will make you appreciate certain things about piston fillers, about gold nibs, and yes, even about really tough plastic pens, even when they carry a premium price, and even when you're a cheapskate like me. Now, as we look over the design, first impressions are it is very simple. Again, that's the philosophy of Bauhaus design. You keep it simple, functional, and yet there is always an interesting sophistication to that simplicity, and some of it is in material choice and things like that. So that's what's going on here. Again, this is Macrolon material. You can find some of these pens that were released in other materials. There is a blue one, which is a special edition. I think it looks cool. You do pay a hefty premium when you can find one. The main features when it comes to materials here is that the pen is meant to be durable. You buy this and you're probably buying it to keep it pretty much the rest of your life and pass it down to your kid if you want to. And you ought to be able to do this if it is well taken care of and no tragic accidents happen, right? So it has a spring-loaded steel clip, functions very well. The finial is a polished Macrolon finial that is attached, and then you come down to what is basically a trim line. Then you come down, and that is bezeled at the end of the cap. I mean, it's very, very simple. The only real embellishment, if you want to call it that here, is that it does say Lamy here on the side of the clip, and that done in their standard font. Nothing crazy going on there. Then the barrel tapers down. Now, here's what impresses me about this pen every time I use it, and especially when I'm done filling it, and that is the tolerances here are so good that you can barely tell where you go from barrel to piston knob. Maybe you didn't even notice until I mentioned it. Now, I'm not going to turn it very far because this pen is full of ink, but you see the line open up there, but when you close it, it all but disappears. It's very well done and very well machined. And that's one of the delights of using this pen to me, is if you appreciate really great manufacturing and machining, even though you might not care that much for the material, it's impressive. And when you take that cap off, and let me just put it back on for a second so you can hear this, it has a nice little snick. Let me do that again. You hear that? So when you take it off, you find a couple of the features that people tend to love or hate. I'll get to those, but first let me just show you. It posts very well, very securely. It seals quite well. You can kind of see, I don't have my flashlight on me today, but you can kind of see that it is lined inside that cap, and it seals well. This pen, for me, I can't speak for anybody else's pen, but this pen, from the time it was new 5 years ago, has performed in terms of dry out as well as a platinum pen. I don't have dry out problems with this pen. I can leave it for a couple of weeks and it's going to write like I inked it up a few minutes ago. It just works, and I love that. This is one of my most dependable, most reliable fountain pens, and I've got several. Maybe I may have several dozen, I don't know, but I've got a bunch of really reliable fountain pens. This would still be up in that like top 10 most reliable pens, and a lot of those are tied for I don't have problems with them at all, like with this pen. But it seals well, even though it is just a snap-on cap. It's held in place, by the way, by these two little tabs, which are spring-loaded. This is actually a spring ring inside the pen, and you may be able to make out that there's a trim line. This is where this screws on together, and this is set in there. And these two little tabs spring out and click to the cap and hold it in place. I think that, because then it can't ease up any while it's capped, is part of what helps it keep such a great seal. Now, it is one of those things that some people don't tend to like, because for me, for example, I would normally hold about where those tabs are, and that really drove me nuts. And then I decided, you know what, I'm not going to get past this, so I'm going to have to work past this. And I just ended up finding a space forward and a space back, depending on kind of how thick the notebook I'm writing on and angles and things like that I want to write that day. And since doing that, you know what, the tabs have stopped bothering, but it almost was a big negative for me. I was almost one of those people who did not like that enough to leave it in a drawer, but that didn't end up happening. And you will notice I have a little bit of ink there, and that's because I still need to clean that off well. It was in a travel bag the other day as we drove all over the state of Texas, and somewhere in there it got jostled, and just one little drop of ink got in that cap and made a little ink ring there. Not a fault of the pen, more a fault of a few bumpy roads and maybe even some heat while we were out of the car, stopping at different places. But the pen performed beautifully every time I needed it. Just really is a reliable pen. Now let's continue on the design. Let's do the grip section next. So this is stainless steel, and one of the most impressive things about it to me is the way that you move so seamlessly from stainless steel to Macrolon. You would not be crazy to wonder how they forged these two materials from the same block, because it almost feels as if they did. And for me, that is one of the intriguing features of the pen. And they say at Lamy that this was one of the hardest parts of the design of the pen and manufacturing of the pen to nail down. But they have nailed it down. It is really fantastic, and it looks so good. And you don't see this replicated, certainly not to this degree, in other designs often, if at all. They've really done a magnificent job. Then you come again up to those little tabs, which again, depending on your grip, might be a problem, but if you can work around it, it will be worth it. And then you find the ink window. Now the ink window for me is a little bit of a love-hate thing, because it really depends so much on the lighting in the room as to whether or not it does any good. It's not a very big ink window, and it just gives you an idea of how much ink you may or may not have in the pen. Now this one right now is almost, I'm going to say probably 3/4 full. Holds a little over 2 milliliters, so you can ink this up and use it for quite a while. The one good thing is that if it's nearly empty at least, you probably will be able to get a pretty good reading on that window. But in the in-between, sometimes, especially with a dark blue ink like this, a little bit difficult, but you can at least see here on camera that that window is there and is at least somewhat usable. Again, just comes all the way back and tapers to that piston knob, which again just disappears. It's a very simple design, but it is, I think, an elegant and sophisticated design. And it's one that reminds me of the quote by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the author of The Little Prince, that says, "Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away." And I think this design is just right there. There really is nothing I would add to this pen. And is there anything left that I would take away? On the one hand, I would say the tabs, but on the other, I do believe that they are so essential to the function in terms of keeping this pen from drying out that I would rather have them than not have them. And it's my guess that that's why they are still there nearly 60 years later. Now looking at the nib, well, you might think, well, there's not really that much to look at. No, this is I would say a semi-hooded nib. It's not fully hooded, not like a Parker 51 or something like that, and I do like those designs, and those I like for their minimalism and simplicity of design. I really like those too, but this just takes it, I think, a step farther. The nib, though, is a gold nib. It is 14 karat gold. This one is a fine, writes more like a medium, and you will find that to be true of most of the Lamy 2000 pens. Think of them as a step past where you might be used to. The extra fine is a fine, the fine's a medium, the medium's a broad. They're wet writers, and I do like that. It writes with this diamine Oxford blue really well. In fact, I don't think I've ever put another ink in this pen. I believe this is the first I put in, and I liked the pairing so well, I've just never changed. You find the breather hole here in the stainless steel grip section. An interesting way that they have cut that. Again, just all very, very simple but sophisticated. Look at the slight bezel you find at the end of the section in the rounded part. Just little things like that you will find now and then will impress you in how well the machining is done here and the quality of engineering. Really is a neat pen in that sense. This is a smooth nib. You find people who get real frustrated that some of these pens have a sweet spot. I guess I lucked out, or maybe my grip just happens to be in line with where the sweet spot is on this particular example, but I don't have that problem. This just writes and writes really well. But be aware, some people do find that the pen has a narrow sweet spot, and you'll need to know whether or not that's compatible with your grip. So before buying one, if you can try it out at a store or borrow one from a friend, that's probably a good idea. Now, this pen is already full, but I just want to show you how the filling goes. So you put it down into the ink and you will twist, and that's to the left, and that will expel the air or the ink that is in the pen, and then you will twist back clockwise and that will draw the ink in. Very simple. The mechanism works great. I find this an easy pen to clean. I don't find the need to take it all the way apart, and I'm not going to do that in this video. There are other videos where they take the pen apart and show you how that's done, and you can watch those. But I find that simply the simple method of cleaning it out and flushing the pen several times with pen flush and then distilled water works great. I've never had a need to do otherwise. Now, I don't leave this pen uninked. I use it, I clean it, I fill it, I use it, I clean it, I fill it. Sometimes I top it off without cleaning it in between, and it has always just functioned exactly as it should. All right, so let's do a quick size comparison, and I also want to talk a little bit about its comparison and design to some of these pens. So keep in mind, I bought this in 2020. Virtually unchanged, a few refinements here and there, but virtually unchanged in terms of the design from 1966. Think about that pen came into a world where something like this Parker 45 was more the standard design, and these do not look like they came from the same decade. Truthfully, this pen to me looks like it might have come from the 80s versus the time of the Parker 45. Really, a very different and striking design in its original context. I think it still is, but it's especially in its context. When you put this beside a 1966 Pelican, or we're not talking about the same pen world, are we? Much newer, and probably a little bit of, cross-country rivalry going on here. Another great little German pen that just came out in the last year is the Diplomat Viper. And there are some things that they have in common. This one has a hooded nib, that one is semi-hooded. The overall shape, a little bit similar. Certainly the materials are different. This is anodized aluminum, and they're very different in the way that their materials are used, but probably competing a little bit for some of the same buyers. This one is also nice and modern and a terrific pen. But this is a cartridge converter, and it is metal, and some people prefer the warmness of that macrolon, even if they don't think it's as pretty. It might feel a little bit better to some people. But I can see people kind of cross-shopping those two pens. And then just for something that is familiar, maybe across a wider range of users, there is the Pilot Metropolitan. Now with those pens uncapped and unposted, pretty much the same length all along the line here. The Lamy 2000 might actually be the shortest. You can see a similarity of the semi-hooded nib between it and that Parker 45. And then when we see the pins in the posted length, the Lamy 2000 is actually the longest here, followed by the Metropolitan, then the Viper, and then the Parker 45. All of the pens are quite nicely balanced, all four of these. The Lamy 2000, I am going to say, probably has, for me, just the most natural balance of each of these pens. Now before we get into the writing test, there are a couple of things that I want to say about the pen and share with you. So on the design, one of the things that I really like about this pen is that in its excellence, it is also understated and even, I don't know, there's a bold confidence to the design while being a bit unassuming. And that for me is one of my favorite things about the design of the pen. And I know it's kind of weird because you go, it's just a black plastic pen, but no, it's more than that, and especially in its posted writing position where you get to see that stainless steel grip and the nib and all. It kind of transforms your impression of the pen when it's in its writing position. But I like it. And one of the things I like, it just dawned on me while I was doing my trip around Texas. I had speaking engagements, I had training for an upcoming position that I'm going to have with the Kiwanis organization in a division in Texas. And so I was taking a lot of notes and taking a lot of classes, and I'm teaching classes, and I'm also still doing homework for graduate school, all of these things. And so I wrote with this pen a lot during those 3 stops. And I just came to appreciate it again. It's always in rotation, just pretty much perpetual. Even if I don't feature it in pens in use, it is still inked up, and I'm probably still going to use it at least once a week anyway. There are just a few pens that are like that. But having this as my daily carry for basically 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, almost exclusively. There was one little side trip we took to the beach, and I took a couple of other pens just for fun. But having it during that time, I realized something. This is such a tremendously good everyday carry, and one of the reasons is the simplicity and yet stateliness of its design. This pen is at home in all of those different scenarios. So whether I was the teacher or the student, whether I was the guest or the host, whether I was in a suit or whether I was in just business casual, and frankly a couple of times in the pocket of a Hawaiian shirt, the pen just always fit in. No, not all pens can do that. If they have too much flourish, if they have too much flash, if they're trying a bit too hard, like one of those other German makers just almost always tries to do, they don't fit everywhere. In fact, some of those pens don't fit anywhere except on a shelf as something of a trophy. This is not that pen. This is not a trophy. This can be both. This can be perfectly at home in a mechanic's pocket in uniform and dressed up when you're going to a banquet. I mean, it really does work in many, many settings. And I think that for me, it's because what I see that Lamy has done with this pen, and did nearly 60 years ago, is they designed a pen that is a true writing instrument. This is not an eco trip. This is not a decoration. It's not a flourish. This is a tool, in the best sense of that word, to do your best writing in every situation, to do it reliably, and, at least in the case of the one I bought, to do it excellently every time. This pen was designed and engineered in a time, I'm a bit of a car buff, and it was in a time when Germany was perhaps at its peak in engineering excellence. A 1966 Mercedes, a 1966 Porsche, or more like what my family had, a 1966 Volkswagen. All of those were excellent in their own way, just absolutely fantastic in ways that none of those are today. And I don't mean to insult any of those brands or the people who work there or the people who drive them, but if you gave me my choice, do I want a modern Mercedes-Benz? Well, I'm a preacher, so it's never going to happen, but do I want a modern Mercedes-Benz? Not that much. I see what some of the owners are saying. I see that they're having things break on their cars that I'm never having break in my Ford or my family's 3 Toyotas. It just never happens. But would I take a 66 Mercedes? Pfft, in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. I'm on Bring a Trailer all the time looking for an old diesel Mercedes that lasts a lifetime because it was designed to do what it was supposed to do and to do it well, the best or nothing. And I feel like Lamy in 1966 was taking the exact same approach. The difference is, while you can say about Mercedes, die Qualität ist kaputt, you can't say that about Lamy. They have held on to their original vision, their original dream for this pen. They've never cheaped it down, so yeah, they are expensive, but they are well made and they function just as they are supposed to when well taken care of and well maintained, just like a 66 Mercedes. And that's about as good as you can get. But now let's put it to paper before we close this video out. I mentioned earlier, these pens write pretty wet. We'll do a test right here, right quick, just to see. Yeah, pretty wet for a fine, isn't it? And this is, again, a 14 karat gold fine. And I just find it's a really smooth writer. Great flow, very reliable again. Being a semi-hooded nib kind of helps with that, really. Now, in a lot of ways, this is just a pen that writes a nice standard line, It's not like a soft nib that's going to give you a lot of line variation or anything like that. But I do find that at least with the fine, you get some variation in the width of the stroke a little bit. Mine seems to go with how quickly I write the letters, which, you know, I write in kind of spasms a little bit sometimes. But that can make for, you know, some line variation. It can happen. It's one of those pens that can get out of your way if you want to really focus on your writing, and you just write, which to me, that's the best mark of a pen. I'm going to show you a little bit of a speed test, and it will keep up. Maybe we'll find the sweet spot. It's not likely that we'll find flow problems, but we might find that sweet spot. Let's try it. This is real time. I did feel a lift there one time. Maybe here, maybe there. This was a lift, I think. That might have been me turning just a little bit. I think it probably does. I think you got enough witnesses out there that there's a little bit of a sweet spot. But I think I lucked out, and it's just kind of the way I generally hold the pen is in that sweet spot. It doesn't have any kind of a ergonomic grip to help you keep in that spot, but if it is compatible with the way you write, maybe you'll stay in the sweet spot. As I said, I really like that this is just a pen that goes anywhere. It does what it's supposed to do every time. It's really, even though I really like the iconic design, that's really not what appeals to me most about this pen. What appeals is that every time I want to use it, it's ready to go. And it does it with a bit of style that isn't tacky, gaudy, or showy. And that I also really appreciate. But what about you? Do you like the Lamy 2000? Have you had experience with it? Share that in the comments below. As always, I do want to thank you, seriously, for all your likes and your comments. And I really appreciate all of that. And I hope that you have a wonderful week. God bless you. And I'll see you in the next review.